low frequency is the risk here. High frequency is very rarely the risk when it comes to advertising. The issue is actually low frequency. Are we spending too much budget on trying to reach people just once? Memory doesn't fade gently over time like you might suggest, but actually the way that memory fades is much more dramatic, and the drop of being exposed to something and your memory dropping is actually almost immediate. Within the first hour of learning something new, hi everyone, welcome back to Demand Decoded. Dan here with you today for a solo episode. And in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about something that should probably be bothering you more than it might do right now. Because somewhere in your ICP, there's a buying committee right now that's about to kick off a new search for exactly what you sell. They've got the budget, they've got the problem, and they're going through the motions of putting together a shortlist for the vendors that they want to reach out to. And the issue is your name isn't on it. Not because you can't do the job, not because you might even be best for the job, but because they can't remember that you actually exist. And I suppose the really uncomfortable part around this is that you probably did reach them at some point, maybe in the last 6 months, 9 months. They saw your content, they might have clicked an ad, they've come across your name in a conversation or somewhere during, their content browsing experience. An impression on them was made of your brand, of your message, but then it just faded over time. And that's exactly what I'm going to cover in this episode. It's not a new channel, it's not a new tactic, but it's a fundamental part of human memory that most B2B marketing programs are just completely ignoring. And once you understand this theory, you see it absolutely everywhere, and you can take it into everything you do in B2B marketing. Before we get into the podcast today, here's a quick word from our sponsors, HubSpot. Most businesses think they know their customers. They have the data, the records, the history, but it's scattered across 3 teams and 4 systems, which means nobody can actually use it. HubSpot connects it all. Every interaction, every support ticket, every conversation into one platform every team can work from. So when sales talk to a customer, marketing already know the full story. And when you know more, you grow more. Check out HubSpot.com, the agentic customer platform for growing businesses. Okay, so I'm not a scientist, far from it actually, but we are going to start with a bit of science because this is what this entire episode really is based upon. And it's definitely worth it because the science and the specifics about how you see this theory, how you use this theory, change everything you think about, really. And we're going to be talking about the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, what it actually is, how it was found, and why the shape of that curve actually matters in every decision you make. I don't expect the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve to be extremely new to anybody, perhaps, or if it is, this might be more interesting to you. But I think really it came up last week and it just made me think of actually how important this is and the fact we've never spoken about it on the podcast and we really need to. And how when we think about the way it ties into B2B marketing, it really, really just hits hard. The long sales cycles, the complex buying committees, the fact only 5% of your market is actually in market to buy it just a fraction of the time, it just really compounds into ways that B2C marketers who can get impulse purchases and things like that just don't have to deal with. And yeah, we'll take it channel by channel, look at how the Ebbinghaus forgetting her curve sinks into all of this. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll really see how this theory kind of runs throughout everything we do in B2B marketing and the importance of it. All right, let's start at the beginning because I think a lot of people have probably heard of the phrase, the forgetting curve, and maybe, glanced over it or just realize it's important, but actually haven't stressed on how important perhaps. And if you don't know much about the theory, basically this German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus, did a study on himself actually to begin with in the 1880s, which is all about memory. And he ran a series of memory tests on himself and essentially found that within the studies he was running, memory doesn't fade gently over time like you might suggest, but actually the way that memory fades is much more dramatic, and the drop of being exposed to something and your memory dropping is actually almost immediate. Within the first hour of learning something new, most of that, after the hour's gone, is already gone. It's disappeared, and by the 24-hour mark, you've typically forgotten about 70% of what you were exposed to. By the end of the week, 90% lost, and then the curve eventually flattens. And what after that is, you tend to get maybe a week or so, a couple of weeks for it to actually stick around at a much lower level. So the shape of the curve is really important here, because it's essentially a steep cliff followed by a plateau that evens out a little bit. And most of the forgetting, this is really important, happens fast. It happens almost immediately. The reason this matters so much is because most of the way that we might think in marketing or in business or in life really, is that forgetting is a gradual process that, we'll forget that over time. But actually, the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve really just shows and is evidence and proof that forgetting doesn't work like that. It's instant, it's sudden, and it's much different to forgetting over a longer period of time. And this isn't just a kind of theory that people have mapped to marketing over time. This is a data-proven mathematical shape that's been replicated over and over again since. So what we're talking about here is essentially a measurable property of how human memory works, and this directly obviously correlates then into how B2B buyers work, because we're all human and affected by the way that memory works and gains and compounds and forgets over time. The interesting thing is here, once you start thinking of a few examples, you see how important the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve is, and like how true it is. So one example that I used on a call last week was around a new song on the radio. So, when you're driving home from work or you're just driving around and you hear this song comes on, you might think, oh yeah, I quite like that. Or maybe you think, oh, I hate this song, but you leave it on, anyway. And you might catch the first half of the chorus and then it ends, the next song starts, and then you carry on with your day. But then 2 weeks later, somebody asks, have you heard that song? You have absolutely no idea what they're talking about because you only heard, the first section of it. You heard it, you registered it, but it was gone after that. Now, if you think about, turning on the radio in your car every single morning and they're just shuffling the same playlist, that song gets into heavy rotation in your mind. You hear it on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe you don't hear it Friday, but you can't escape it. And by week 3 of hearing that song, every single day, every word. You're singing it in the shower, like you're singing it when you're walking the dog. You probably still remember it in 5 years' time. Like you can do karaoke without the lyrics, basically. Nothing changed about the song. You might not have even liked the song, but what changed was the frequency and exposure that you got to that song again and again and again. And the radio station, whether they know it or not, ran that song on a repetitive program, and it worked in terms of you remembering that song. So yeah, this is the forgetting curve in action. Like if you have one exposure to something, give it a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, you'd have forgotten it. Repeated exposure at the right intervals, and it's embedded in your brain. And you might not forget that for years to come. So yeah, this is just one example, but you'll see it again and again and again when you think about advertising campaigns, in anything really, that you think, oh yeah, I do remember that because I remember seeing these things, and then you'll tie all the moments over the years, over the weeks that you've actually seen this one thing, and that's why it's so ingrained in your brain. So without, being too scientific here, because I actually can't anyway, but understanding the mechanism of forgetting is really important, because it changes the way that you think about what marketing is actually doing. Because memory isn't like a hard drive that just stores things over time. You don't record something and just store it. It's a reconstructive process that every time you remember something, you actually rebuild that memory from fragments that you have you've remembered over time. It's filling in the gaps, and it's reinforcing like the pathways that actually hold all of this together. And the more times you retrieve and encounter something, the stronger those pathways get. So it's easier to remember something. Essentially, the more you do that, the stronger they are. The less you do that, the weaker they become. And I suppose if you think about this like a path or a walk that you might go on, the first time that you actually walk through this field, a long grassy field, you barely leave a mark, but then you walk through it a few times, there's a faint trail, you walk it every single day, and then there's a clear path around that field that is essentially being, trodden down by you doing that same thing again and again and again. If you stop walking on it, then it's slowly going to start, bringing back the grass and bringing back the life. And that is essentially memory formation. Your brand is trying to cut the path through a very crowded field, a very long field of grass. And every gap in your presence is that growth just creeping back over the path. Right, so before we get into how this impacts B2B marketing, there's two things that are really important to note that fight the forgetting curve. So the first one is spaced repetition. So how often are you being exposed to something at regular intervals? And what Ebbinghaus found was that if you just reviewed information just before you're about to forget it, the memory was reinforced much more efficiently than if you just reviewed it repeatedly again and again and again over a period of time. So the timing that you actually get exposed to something is really important. So if you review something one day and then 3 days later, then a week later, then 2 weeks later, each review resets the forgetting curve, and it's resetting it at a much shallower angle. So you need less repetition over time to actually maintain the same level of recall. Think about how this is tying to, B2B advertising campaigns. This is what I'm going to get onto next, but it's essentially about structuring your campaigns so that whether people know it or not, every brand touchpoint, every ad, every piece of content is a way to maintain that recall to your brand. The next part of the forgetting curve that can fight it is meaningfulness. So when we think about the Ebbinghaus study itself, he initially just used some, nonsense syllables that were put together because they had no meaning. That was the whole point of it. And they were designed to be forgotten really quickly and decay fast in the memory. But when he compared the retention rate to meaningful content, real words, connected ideas, things that actually have relevance to his life, the decay rate was much slower. So this is really important when it comes to marketing creative, because if something is more meaningful, it's more likely to slow down the rate of the forgetting curve. So there's really two fighting forces here in the forgetting curve. It's how often you're showing up at the right intervals and to make what you say worth remembering. So frequency, just endless amounts of frequency without relevance is just pure noise that will still be forgotten. But relevance without frequency still fades. It's this combination of both that really empowers buyers to remember your brand. So now let's think about why this matters so much in B2B marketing, and even more so compared to B2C marketing. So as I mentioned at the start, B2B buyers are only active in marketing for about 5% of the time, and the other 95% of the time they're not looking. They're not in active buying mode. They might not even know they have a problem, and they're not coming into market to buy. But the forgetting curve is still running because the memory in their brains is still running. So if you only show up when somebody is buying, when they are in that 5% of market during that very short space in time when they are actually researching and evaluating vendors, you've actually missed most of the memory building window, which happens outside of the 5% most of the time. The brands that actually stay visible during the 95% are much better recalled when the 5% kicks in. You're already on the shortlist, probably, if you've built up that recall over time, or at least then if they go into some sort of competitive research and evaluation and analysis phase, if they see your brand again and again coming up after already having such strong recall for you, you're more likely to enter the final shortlist. If you're listening to this right now, you're probably doing what every other B2B marketer is doing, asking, how do I get my brand cited in ChatGPT? How do I show up in Gemini, Perplexity, Claude? And at Blend, we help you do exactly that. We engineer visibility in AI search for B2B companies. We build the content, implement the technical optimization, and track your performance across every major AI platform. So when buyers are researching solutions like yours, your brand gets recommended. We know how to engineer visibility in AI search because we built a framework and proved it on ourselves first. And this took months of experimentation, but in the end it delivered 470 high-value prompt appearances, 80% citation rate across prompts, and 250% more AI-sourced leads. We proved the framework, and now we're starting to roll it out across customers who are seeing similar results. So, if you want to dominate AI search in your category, visit blendb2b.com to learn more about our AI search services. I just wanted to take a quick break in this episode to tell you about a podcast that's essential for understanding how AI is reshaping marketing. The Next Wave, hosted by Matt Wolf and Nathan Lands from the HubSpot Podcast Network. They consistently break down the latest AI developments and what they actually mean for the way that you do business. In one episode, they dive into whether 2026 is the year AI agents become truly indispensable, covering the explosions of new AI models, how they're getting smarter and cheaper, and why companies are racing to build integrated, emotionally aware agents. If you're not keeping up with how fast AI is moving, your business is already falling behind. The Next Wave, available wherever you get your podcasts. You've also got things like long sales cycles, which just amplify the problem. B2B deals can take absolutely ages, months, 6 months, 9 months, 18 months even, from first awareness of you and your business and how you can help them all the way to close. So if somebody only hears about you in month 1 of that deal cycle and then you go quiet, you're probably forgotten by month 3. But the competitor who maintains presence throughout that entire buying cycle, throughout that journey, then they are probably going to win more on familiarity, on consistent repetition of having their brand exposed to the buying committee. And this is basically just like neuroscience in a nutshell. And where this differs to B2C in one way is the multi-stakeholder buying committee, essentially, because the average B2B buying decision now involves about 6 to 10 people. When we compare that to B2C, which is one single consumer, maybe 2 at a push, the committee is much more complex and much harder to reach. You don't just have to maintain presence with that one champion, but all stakeholders are on the same forgetting curve. So you might have the CMO, the CFO, the CTO that all need their independent exposure to your brand in order to keep resetting the forgetting curve. So one touch point isn't just going to translate naturally into memory across the entire organization. It's about building up memory with that cohort of people in the buying committee again and again and again. So where this actually came up was I was presenting to a client last week and we were talking about LinkedIn ads and the importance of frequency on LinkedIn ads. And I was kind of running through this calculation that we have to work out budget, and budget is all based on audience size and frequency and how we hit a target frequency based on the audience size and what budget we would need in order to do that. And so, yeah, we got talking about frequency and the importance of that. And I happened to mention the Ebbinghaus curve. It popped into my brain for some reason to try and communicate why it's so important to actually maintain a frequency level, and that we don't just have a huge audience on LinkedIn with the most minimum budget we can possibly get away with and then hit a target frequency of 1 per month, because it's not enough. And I suppose a lot of people think of frequency like trying to avoid ad fatigue, that we're going to run too many ads and like we need to maintain a lower frequency to not overdo it. But actually, when you think about the Ebbinghaus theory, low frequency, and this is the point that I was trying to get at, low frequency is the risk here. high frequency is very rarely the risk when it comes to advertising. The issue is actually low frequency. Are we spending too much budget on trying to reach people just once? Because the Ebbinghaus forgetting theory tells us that, well, they're going to have forgotten that. By the time then they see our ad again, they would have actually forgotten that they ever saw it in the first place if we have a frequency of 1 per month. So that single impression actually has about 0 retention value over a period of time because the curve just eats it within days. So the optimal frequency is less about avoiding annoying somebody because of ad fatigue, and it's more about resetting the forgetting curve again and again and again. The way that some B2B LinkedIn ads are run is that essentially, frequency isn't thought about, and actually the only thing that's thought about is how much budget can we get from finance, and we'll just run that against our audience. And this is just, essentially just throwing money into the forgetting curve, and you're paying to be seen once, but you're forgotten within a few days, and then wondering why people aren't remembering you, pipeline isn't moving, people aren't coming back after seeing your ads. It's because they've forgotten it because of the Ebbinghaus forgetting theory. There's no universal number when it comes to frequency, but there is research that points to about 7+ exposures before even reliable recall starts to begin. So what I've seen a lot of the time is that a lot of B2B campaigns are running at about 2 to 3 impressions per person, and then they'll call it done because they're operating in campaign cycles. But actually, the goal of repetitive frequency and exposure should be consistent. It should be spaced out, not a burst of campaign activity and then just total silence. So that's why the businesses and the products that you see again and again and again, just consistently, they're absolutely everywhere. It's because they've got always on campaigns, always on content programs that are continuously resetting the forgetting curve and beating those quarterly bursts of activity, because they're always continuously resetting the curve. And this means that when buyers come into market, they've been exposed to these brands for so long that they are beginning to remember them and putting them on the shortlist. If you operate on this campaign model, it might work for a period of time when buyers then move into market if you get the timing right on when they move into market, but you risk missing the opportunity when they do move into market. If you're running your campaign in months 1 to 3, but a buyer's not coming into market until months 9 to 12, they would have forgotten about your campaign if you went radio silent on them after the initial activity. The forgetting curve isn't just isolated to paid media. It actually runs throughout everything you do in marketing. When we think about content marketing, frequency matters so much, because if we're just posting sporadically, then the forgetting curve resets every single time and nobody builds up that strong association and affinity for you. And the consistency of a strong theme that is resonant with somebody is building a much stronger resonance with your brand. Email newsletters are a great example of this, because they are a tool for regular expected trust that builds up over a long period of time. When we think about brand building as well, I mean, brand building is actually just the act of getting over the forgetting curve at scale. How do we continuously reset the forgetting curve to not have this huge drop off over a period of time, because the paths that we formed in our brains to remember this brand are strengthening time and time again? And this is where you have things like consistency of visual identity. So like every time you go through a rebrand, this can be really hard on the forgetting curve, because people essentially have to go through the process of tying those core memories back to your brand and what you actually do. So consistency of visual is really important. And this all comes back to the creative, as I mentioned earlier, which is about being memorable in everything you do. It's not just an exposure game, but it's also how you create memorable touch points along the buyer journey as well. Being just distinctive isn't just about how you can be loud and bold, but it's about how you can actually connect with somebody, how you can be memorable to them so that the forgetting curve doesn't plateau as much over a period of time. This really does just go through everything in marketing. Like demand gen programs that people would treat as kind of one-off campaigns. They should be structured, continuous presence, not just a like one-off burst that's leaving gaps where the curve is just working and decaying memory over time. Events and webinars are another good example, because you might have a one-off event, a one-off webinar to give you a spike in awareness, to give you a spike in leads, but actually the decay from that is just rapid and people will forget you instantly. A series format fights the curve much more effectively. And when we think about like event follow-up and things, this is essential to fight the forgetting curve again, because if somebody just attends an event, attends a webinar, and then you never hear from them again, this is just the forgetting curve taking its kind of hold on them, and their memory of you will just continue to decay over time. A podcast, actually, everyone listening to this, thank you again, but it is a fantastic way to build up high frequency, high intimate touch points that you can do in B2B marketing, really, because the people who are following weekly are getting those spaced, perfectly kind of like timed in their routine as well, positioning of your brand every single week or multiple times a week. And the key here is consistency. If you have a podcast that you've listened to intermittently because they hardly ever post, how often do they actually make it into your regular listening schedule? Probably not at all, because you've forgotten that they exist. You've forgotten to go back and check if they've got a new episode. It doesn't make it into your schedule. And every episode that is posted, that is published, that you see pop up, is essentially a retrieval queue, a reason for the audience to go and re-access your brand, to see you again. So that's why consistent posting is so important, especially in formats like podcasting, because you really need to try and worm your way into somebody's schedule in order to not be forgotten. I can guarantee now, if you were to scroll through all of your most listened to podcasts, they will all be consistently posting, because as humans, we crave that routine and that consistency that we can get from this. I've just got some things to mention on this theory that are maybe a bit counterintuitive, don't get talked about enough when it comes to how this works. Number one is when budget cuts happen, when you need to strip out budget from marketing, often the first thing to go is the brand or awareness spend that you have assigned to campaigns, because it's just a slow ROI signal, or sometimes like you actually struggle to justify the ROI of it. But this is the spend that essentially maintains memory. So cutting this essentially means that the forgetting curve just continues to trail off, and actually it makes everything else you do way less effective. So this is why you hear about people who talk about brands during economic downturns are usually stronger when they continue to invest in long-term marketing, because again, they build up brand and they reset the forgetting curve, and it's got less plateau over time, basically. Attribution is another one that this kind of fights against a bit, because when you think about attribution models, last click attribution is often something people use to credit the bottom of the funnel touch point. But this has no care for the 8, 10, 20 touch points that actually built up the memory and was the cause for somebody to come back to your brand and ultimately, book a demo or take the conversion that they wanted to. So this attribution in some ways is just it systematically undervalues everything you do around brand content, top of funnel, like brand awareness activity, everything you're investing essentially to build memory. Okay, I'm kind of running out of things to talk about when it comes to Ebbinghaus here, because, I don't have a PhD in psychology, but hopefully this has been an insightful episode, and just it takes us out of the AI bubble as well, and like all the crazy things happening in marketing right now, and actually gets back into the fundamentals of this is what happens and what matters when it comes to human psychology. And the forgetting curve, just it bringing it back up last week in conversation just made me think, oh yeah, this is what's important in marketing. It's making sure that people remember our brand. It's making sure that when the buying trigger happens, they think of us, that we are on the shortlist, that when they see our brand again, when they're researching, when they're evaluating, they think, oh yeah, I've seen them before, and we're more likely to, you know, come onto that list and for them to reach out to us. So I suppose one takeaway is just to remember that forgetting your brand, forgetting everything everybody ever knows about you, is the default behavior when it comes to human psychology. Being remembered by your buyers, by your audience, is the work. That is what we have to do when it comes to marketing. We have to make sure that people remember us, and they're not going to do that on a one-off campaign. It is a structure. It is an intentional brand play that's built up over a long period of time in order to give us the best chance of possible to win business that's moving into market, because we've been so present through the entire time they were out of market too. Before you go, if all you can think about right now is AI search and how buyers are using it to find products in your category, we should talk. At Blend, we've built a proven framework for answer engine optimization. We tested it on ourselves first and saw 470 high-value prompt appearances, 80% citation rate, and a whopping 250% increase in AI source leads. That's real high-intent leads who are finding us through AI search. We've since rolled it out to dozens of clients who are now seeing similar results. Our AI service engineers your visibility in ChatGPT, Perplexity, AI mode, Gemini through structured content, schema markup, and continuous optimization, and measurement through our partner Scrunch. If you want to show up when your buyers are asking AI tools for recommendations in your category, find out more about our AEO services at blendb2b.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.